SPCAAM podcast. Today we're going to discuss the minimum wage. The National Wages Consultative Council Act was first implemented on 23rd September 2011. Then we had the National Minimum Wage Order implemented in January 2013. A set of minimum wage equivalent to Malaysian ringgit 900 ringgit was paid to Malaysian workers in Peninsula. Then we had 800 ringgit paid to Malaysian workers in Sabah, Sarawak and Labuan. The introduction of the minimum wage 13 years ago brought significant changes to many workers in Malaysia because it guaranteed a minimum income monthly. Prior to the introduction of the minimum wage, workers were earning as low as 350 ringgit a month. So today we have the president of SPCAAM with us, who's going to share his insights with the effectiveness of the Minimum Wage Act since its implementation in 2011. We have with us J. Solomon, president of SPCAAM. Welcome, Solomon. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, Karuna, for inviting me for this important session. This session is, of course, very close to my heart, and especially in relation to the minimum wage.
Right. Okay, Solomon, we'll get straight into the session. Now, let me ask you the first question. Is the minimum wage of 1,500 ringgit suitable for workers in Malaysia?
No, it's not.
Okay.
For 67 years after attaining independence, we have a minimum salary of RM 1,500. Which is far too low for any Malaysians to live a quality life. So we need a mechanism whereby it should be related to living wage, not minimum wage. So there must be a wage mechanism for living wage, not minimum wage.
Living wage. Interesting. Why should it be living wage and not minimum wage? What's the difference?
See, in 2018, Bank Negara Malaysia reported that Malaysians should have living wage. In 2018 then, Bank Negara said that for a single worker in Kuala Lumpur, he should earn ringgit Malaysia 2,700. And you asked me a question, what is the definition of living wage?
Yeah.
Living wage is a wage where an employee can afford to live an adequate life with shelter, food, and basic necessities. And it is also important that the worker should receive sufficient amount as wages for the worker to live a satisfactory standard of living, and at the same time the worker is not falling into the poverty line. And it is also important to note that the employer also has a moral responsibility to ensure that their staff has a living wage.
Yeah.
And insofar as the minimum wage is concerned, the definition by the ILO is that an employee should receive a minimum amount for the work performed for the given period of time. So this is the ILO definition of minimum wage.
So, Solomon, would I be correct to say that a living wage is what a worker would need to live comfortably, whilst the minimum wage is just a payment just above poverty line, or we may still be under poverty line even with the minimum wage?
Yes, certainly. It's just slightly above the poverty line. But looking at our current minimum wage, certainly it will drag the employee to below poverty
line. Thank you for that, Solomon. So at least now we know what's a living wage and what's a minimum wage. Now, the best that we have in our hands right now is minimum wage, right? So what do you consider an appropriate minimum wage, particularly those living in the bigger cities?
The appropriate minimum wage that we are proposing is RM 2,500 and not RM 1,500
Okay.
as the current minimum wage. Secondly, we must also remember that it is minimum wage. So the minimum wage must be the same across all states. So there should not be any discrimination state-wise. The reason is because if you discriminate state-wise, then you will see more people living from a smaller state to a bigger city.
State.
And one is the workers, young people, will abandon the smaller cities, and there will be overcrowded
Crowding
in
in
the
bigger cities.
bigger cities.
Right.
So, and the other factor is the wealth will not be distributed fairly to all the states. And it is also important that the wages should be based on industrial sectors, and because the hours of work and number of days also differs month to month.
Right.
So in that context, we would propose that it should be based on industrial sector and also hourly and daily rate.
It's very interesting that you say it's 2005 now. Why do you believe 2005 is the most appropriate or fair minimum wage?
Yeah, though Bank Negara Malaysia in 2018 said that a single worker in Kuala Lumpur
Yes.
should have a living wage of 2,700,
Yep.
we must also take into account that EPF also conducted a survey on a state-wise, and when we average the survey done by EPF, we find that the average amount is 2,500 ringgit Malaysia. That is why we are proposing that the minimum wage should be ringgit Malaysia 2,500.
500. Okay. Solomon, are all employers paying the minimum wage of 1,500?
Unfortunately, there are many who are not paying that minimum wage. Therefore, it is my opinion that the business community and the government should adopt a forward-thinking mentality to ensure that the current lip service made by both the employers and the government should be in accordance with the Madani core values, that is well-being and compassion for the rakyat.
Okay. Basically, to be fair.
Yes.
Okay. What are the economic consequences for workers if minimum wage remains at 1,500?
There are many consequences in respect to social and economic factors. And what we see now is that based on the report in 2023, there are about more than 17,000 bankrupt cases, those who are in the age group of 35 to 44. And those who are above 55, the bankrupt cases are more than 5,000 over. So in view of these bankrupt cases, and one of the main reason is the low minimum wage. And this is because historically the business community and the government have always tried their level best to depress the wages.
Right.
And if this goes on, then it will erode the purchasing power of the workers. And we are worried that Malaysia, being a country with rich in resources, we do not want to see many Malaysians living in borrowed income.
Right, right.
This is what will happen if Malaysia continues to sustain the
Low
minimum
wages.
wage as 1,500 RM.
Okay. What are the main expenses that workers struggle with the current minimum wage?
Basic necessities and lower qualities. Many compromise on their three
Meals.
meals
Yes,
per
sir.
day. They compromise on good meals, nutritional meals, and they forego a proper housing, and also health reasons, medical reasons. They are not able to pay for a proper medical costs,
Facilities and things like that.
and for that reason, they compromise their health too. And because of the cost of living is high and the minimum wage is low, both parents have to work long hours just to survive.
Yep.
And as a result of that, the children are left alone to fend for themselves without any attention. And certainly this is a cause for social problem, and also it impacts the health of the workers who are having this minimum wage.
And Solomon, how often should the minimum wage be revised for workers to cope with inflation and the rising cost of living?
In accordance to the National Wages Consultative Council Act, a minimum wage should be reviewed once in 2 years. That means the council can actually review annually too, if they feel it is necessary to review.
Interesting. And if I'm not mistaken, the last review was somewhere in May 2022?
Yes,
Okay.
and certainly it's more than 2 years now,
That's right.
which the council is yet to review the minimum wage.
Why do you think that the Minimum Wage Council has not reviewed the minimum wage since 2022?
The National Wages Consultative Council Act, which came operational in 23rd September 2011, has a clear directive. And they also had created a minimum wage formula. But unfortunately, the council did not comply or follow the minimum wage formula. And that is why today we are having a depressing RM 1,500 as the minimum wage. The council has certainly breached the act, and they have actually failed in their responsibilities to ensure that the minimum wage is reviewed timely. And because they have failed in their responsibilities, it has affected millions of workers in Malaysia. And that is why it is important for the government to comply with the National Wages Consultative Act, which is very clear that once in 2 years, at least you have to review. The disadvantage to the workers is that the council and the ministry are protected by the act.
Okay.
None of the workers are able to take any action or legal suit against the council and the ministry. But that does not mean the ministry or the council can abuse their powers
That's right.
and allow the millions of workers to be impacted as a result of the low minimum wage.
Solomon, if the minimum wage is increased this year, what would be the positive outcomes?
If the minimum wage is increased from 1,500 to RM 2,500, then it goes hand in hand with the high income nation that the government is emphasizing. and by doing so, we will not leave anyone behind.
That's right.
And everyone will have a fair share of the wealth of the
Nation.
Nation. At the present moment, what we see is that the CEOs are drawing millions of ringgit.
That's right.
And some of them are drawing as high as more than 2,000 times the salary of their own employees. And the irony is that these CEOs are not compassionate towards their own employees. When they can actually pay a living wage, but yet they are paying a minimum wage.
Right.
And I must give due credit to Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Saravanan, where he increased the minimum wage by 300 ringgit when he was the Minister of Human Resource in 2022.
That's right. Okay. So the CEOs are actually getting more than living wage, right?
Certainly.
Okay. Thank you, Solomon. And we are coming towards the end of the program. On behalf of SPCAAM, what would you like to conclude this podcast with?
SPCAAM hopes that the Prime Minister, the ministers, and the parliamentarians will focus on empathizing the B40 workers so that they will have the political will to convert the minimum wage to living wage. And by doing so, it will enable the workers a right to livelihood, a decent livelihood, and this will eventually avoid them to live on borrowed income. This is what SPCAAM expects from the Prime Minister, the ministers, and the parliamentarians.
All right. Thank you very much, Solomon, for joining us today. And folks, we'll be back soon with more podcasts from SPCAAM. See you soon.